If there was one book that I recommend everyone read, it would be this book, Hard Truths to Keep Singapore Going by Lee Kuan Yew. This book was co-authored by Lee Kuan Yew and a group of journalists from the Straits Times. It is the one book that I think every Singaporean or anyone interested in the modern miracle of Singapore should read. But before we go into this book, we must first understand who was Lee Kuan Yew. Lee Kuan Yew was Singapore's first Prime Minister. He led the nation from 1959 all the way to 1990. Following his tenure as Prime Minister in 1990, he then became Senior Minister and Minister Mentor in the Singapore government. So from 1990 onwards, all the way to his death, he was serving in government. What makes his story and this book so compelling isn't just that he accomplished great things, but it was how he did it. His impact was so profound that many of the world's greatest leaders view him as a role model and example. Here are a few examples. President Barack Obama called him a legendary figure of Asia in the 20th and 21st centuries, and one of the greatest strategists of Asian affairs. Henry Kissinger, who knew Lee for decades, described him as a man of unmatched intelligence and judgment, and stated that there is no better strategic thinker in the world today. China's transformative leader, Deng Xiaoping, was so impressed by Singapore's economic and social transformation that he specifically studied Lee Kuan Yew's approach during China's opening up period. He later remarked, "If I had only Shanghai, I too might be able to change Shanghai as quickly. But I have the whole of China." Even Margaret Thatcher acknowledged his exceptional insight, saying, "In office, I read and analysed every speech of Lee's. He has a way of penetrating the fog of propaganda and expressing with unique clarity the issues of our times and the way to tackle them." These weren't just diplomatic pleasantries, these were the world's most consequential leaders generally seeking out Lee Kuan Yew as an example to study from. What do I actually admire about Lee Kuan Yew as a young Singaporean? To me, I thought the great thing about Lee Kuan Yew was that he was both a fighter and a builder. When Singapore was fighting for self-governance and independence, you could see that he had fire in his belly and he was willing to do whatever it takes to win. As a fighter, he fearlessly confronted colonialism and was willing to bet his life to get Singapore to self-governance. As a builder, he assembled an exceptional team of leaders. And these leaders include Dr. Goh Keng Swee, Dr. Toh Chin Chye, and Mr. S. Rajaratnam. All of these people were giants in their own right, but he was able to assemble and work with them to build a Singapore that was worth living in. This was often not the norm, when many leaders who were excellent fighters and orators who could gain mass public support often struggled to transition into becoming good builders. But Lee Kuan Yew was able to avoid that trap. If there was only one book from Lee Kuan Yew's collections of books that you should read, I recommend this book. Number one reason as to why I recommend this book is because of its timing and its context. You see, Lee Kuan Yew was already 86 years old when the interview for this book took place. The book was published in 2011, just 4 years before 2015, where he passed away. So at this age, at the ripe old age of 86, he had already accumulated over 5 decades of insights in public office. He was also essentially the last man standing of his generation and of his guard. Many of his compatriots, his teammates, such as Rajaratnam and Goh Keng Swee, have already passed away at this point in time. So he felt this profound sense of urgency, a sense of awareness of his mortality that he would soon pass away. And he was determined to, as I quote, concentrate Singaporean minds on the key issues facing our future. In these interviews, Lee Kuan Yew recognized the stark difference between his founding generation and the younger generation of Singaporeans. He did not lament it, he did not begrudge it. He aimed to only bridge this gap by explaining the unique circumstances in which Singapore was born and hopefully downloading or sharing the insights he had accumulated with the general public. Before we dive deeper, I want to make an important point. I'm not trying to say that we should worship Lee Kuan Yew or that everything in this book is gold. There are some parts where you might find it disagreeable or you might find him downright wrong. For instance, Lee Kuan Yew famously underestimated the role and effect of social media and the internet on politics today. He dismissed those technologies and saw them as tangential, and he felt that these technologies were not going to fundamentally change how governments were going to be organized and how leaders were going to be selected. But if we look around the world today, if we look across all the different democracies, for example, in the US, we see that social media has become an increasingly important, or even the most important arena for politicians to canvass votes. Think about someone like President Donald Trump, who was able to become president off the back of his popularity on social media. Lee Kuan Yew was clearly wrong in that regard. The reason why I think this caveat is important is not because I would like to dunk on him or to pull him down to size. The reason I stated this was because I think the real value in studying or reading Lee Kuan Yew in this book is not in downloading or following his insights, but understanding his approach to problems and the way he has arrived at his own conclusion. For younger Singaporeans like myself, for grappling with an increasingly tense world, his methodology of analysis, his sense of pragmatism, and his unwavering focus on outcomes rather than an ideology is something that we can learn from through reading him. This is what makes hard truths so valuable. It gives us access to one of history's most successful nation builders in his final years. Lee Kuan Yew's keen awareness of his mortality and his eager desire to download these insights into the general public at this stage in life is what makes this book so good. It gives you a sense that he is really and genuinely trying to tell you something about human nature, about society, and that he has nothing to gain, and that shines throughout the book. You don't feel like he's trying to sell you something, he's trying to convince you or persuade you. He's telling you the way he sees the world, and that I think is something that a lot of books don't have today. Now I would like to quickly share with you the 3 key takeaways I had from this book. The first takeaway I had from this book was actually from its chapters list. The chapters list actually highlight to us what Lee Kuan Yew really thought about as the core issues of Singapore. And that is where the book is timeless, because it was able to map out the fundamental issues that Singapore would grapple with as a city-state for the long term. The book is divided into 3 parts. Part 1, facing the hard truths. Part 2, insights for the young and curious. And part 3, private musings. So if you're interested in policy, part 1 is the most important. It has 9 chapters and it talks about some of the key issues that continue to face Singapore today. For example, the role of the People's Action Party and what the role of the opposition should be. What does political leadership look like? Why Singapore was so interested and involved in social engineering? How to keep the Singapore economic miracle going. These are issues that faced us in 2009 when the interviews first started, and they still are relevant problems today in 2025. These aren't just chapters in the book, they are signposts for citizens and leaders alike. They represent the perennial questions that we will continue to grapple with time and time again. The reason I continually revisit this book is because I understand that Singapore is a small city-state. We are extremely open to global forces. This means our society is never static. Whatever progress we've made one year could be lost the next. COVID is an excellent example as to how things can go south really quickly, and why you need good leaders to pull you through the crisis. We are constantly evolving in response to external pressures and opportunities. And if you want to understand how we can go through times of turbulence, it's useful to revisit the thinkings of a man who pulled us through times of extreme turbulence. The second takeaway I had from this book is that every organization, every country should always strive to experiment. Governments, companies, and bureaucracies all have incentives for inertia. They will tend to resist change unless prompted by the leader. And if you have achieved success in the past, it's easier to ride on that success than to find new problems and new challenges to tackle. And Lee Kuan Yew, being a leader, was aware of this fact. So he was consistently trying to experiment, to innovate in the way they approach policy making. One of my favorite examples is from page 158, where he talks about how he allowed Philip Yeo, one of his best civil servants, develop policies to attract young, high potential and budding scientists to find their home in Singapore. He knew that if Singapore was to be on par with the other biomedical hubs of the world like Boston, they needed to find a home for world-class talent to gather and do research here. He knew this was a risky move with no guarantee of success. And he knew that it was extremely difficult to actually do this in real life, because talent often would like to congregate in already established hubs where they could continue doing work that's already been started. So as Singapore faced the cold start problem, we had to do more. We had to be more aggressive in the way we attract talent. Throughout the book, you will see that Lee Kuan Yew had no qualms about experimenting and then pivoting when those experiments didn't pan out. The willingness to try, fail, learn and adapt is central to Singapore's story. This is why today we have things like an excellent public transport system, a comprehensive public housing program, excellent infrastructure and education, and affordable yet world-class healthcare. The third and most profound lesson that I learned from this book is how to handle constraints. Lee Kuan Yew was unflinching in recognizing the hard truths that Singapore would have to grapple with. But he never stopped there. He always sought to find creative solutions to maneuver within those constraints. In 2025, we see an intense geopolitical rivalry occurring between the US and China. And we've already started to see that in 2009. Lee Kuan Yew could have a sense of where things was going. His objective at the start was simple. We have to maximize economic and political space from the start. He understood that in the world of real politics, that the best way for Singapore to proceed in the 21st century is to have a diversified approach in our international relations, and that our value proposition was best illustrated if we could remain neutral and non-threatening to any major powers while maintaining friendly relationships with all. He saw that it was necessary to build strong external links across the world, to be as interconnected as we can so that we will not be boxed in by any specific power. Lee Kuan Yew didn't waste time talking about the unfairness of power imbalances. Instead, he accepts those realities and focuses his efforts on creating space for Singapore to maneuver and give us a freedom of action within those existing constraints. Here's one of my favorite parts of the book. This is a response to the question on the rise of China in Asia and how Lee Kuan Yew thought about it. He said, if the US completely withdraws from East Asia and China becomes the only dominant power, then I say we are in a tighter position, because supposing you do something to displease them, they don't have to invade you. Our ties with them are growing day by day economically, even though we're trying very hard to diversify into India and to other parts of Asia. But they are the big market. All they do is squeeze us economically. Hong Kong now knows its place. The economy goes down, they might say, okay, I allow my chaps to go buy your properties, and the stock market immediately goes up. Do Hong Kongers realize who butters their bread? Yes, of course. So this is an example as to how Lee Kuan Yew saw the world in Asia for Singapore. He knew that as China rose, its main lever wasn't its military force, but its access to its markets, its ability to absorb trade. So his view was that it was always better to diversify, which is why, despite many of the misgivings or faults of the US that Lee Kuan Yew had thought of in the past, he saw that it was necessary to keep them in the region. This was the form of strategic thinking that he had in mind. He knew that these were the hard truths he had to face, China and America being the two largest economies, but he also knew that he could have a whole range of options within those constraints. For me, this book offers us more than insights to Singapore's journey. If you really want to read about Singapore's journey, there are many history books you can read. This book is useful because it gave us a framework or a mental model about how Lee Kuan Yew thought about things, how he sought to govern, what were the virtues and ideals he thought was necessary to keep Singapore going. What made him fascinating to me was that it wasn't that he was perfect or that he was the greatest leader of all time. It was that he had a sense of intellectual curiosity and honesty that he stayed the course throughout his entire life. And I think that's the big lesson for me, that if you want to solve problems, always have an unwavering focus on the results that you can get from all your solutions. Don't be married to a solution. Always try to learn new things. So the crazy thing about this book is that although it's been published almost 14 years ago, I would say like 80 to 90% of it is still relevant for our day and age in the late 2020s. Whether you agree with the specific policies or not, I think there's tremendous value in understanding how one of the best modern statesmen came to be and arrived at his conclusion. His clarity of thought and willingness to confront difficult realities based on his experience and his learnings is something that we can all learn from. And if you found value in this, I hope you can share it with someone that appreciates Lee Kuan Yew's thinking. That would mean a whole world to me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.